Hello. Hello, my name is Bob Barker, and thanks for joining us today. The topic of today's webinar is preparing yourself and your law department for the next recession. And this webinar also is applicable to those that are focused on compliance in their compliance department. For those of you who may not be familiar with Barker Gilmore, we specialize in building corporate legal and compliance departments. We do that through recruiting, everything from the GC and CCO to their key reports, leadership development and executive coaching, succession planning, as well as other consulting to help optimize the legal and compliance department. As far as the GC Advantage program, today's part of that program, and it's a complementary professional development program for legal and compliance leaders. Provides an opportunity to interact with world-class GCs, CCOs, CEOs, board members, as well as executive search consultants. And the intent is to provide insights to help advance your career. The next upcoming webinar is going to be really interesting. It's how to successfully navigate the GC, CCO, and board dynamic. A.B. Cruz, he'll be joined by two CEOs who are also board members and two chief legal officers. And they'll be discussing how to build that high functioning relationship between those three key roles in an organization. We also have recordings of these webinars, have a whole on-demand library, and today's webinar will also be recorded and added to the library in a few days. And then we'll let everybody know who's registered when that is up on the website. As far as questions, please submit your questions using the Q&A icon that's on the Zoom app, and you'll also be able to see questions that have already been submitted. And so if there's one that you feel strongly about, that you have the same type of question, you can just click the thumbs up icon, so you don't have to enter a new question. And then we'll do our best to answer those questions submitted during near the end of the presentation. And at this point, I'd like to turn the webinar over to Mike Williams. Mike, thanks for leading the charge here today.
Well, thank you, Bob, and it's great to be here. Good morning to everyone on the West Coast and in the Rocky Mountains, and good afternoon on the East and Central time zones. My name is Mike Williams. I'm a senior advisor here at Barker Gilmore, and I'm the former executive vice president, general counsel of Staples, and before then, Sony Electronics. And joining me here today is Michelle Banks. Michelle?
Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be on this webinar with Mike and Bob. And I am a senior advisor and executive coach at Barker Gilmore as well. And I was the global general counsel at Gap Inc.
Right. Thank you, Michelle. Well, it's no surprise for anyone looking around or reading the newspaper these days that, we have to brace ourselves because winter is coming. And one of those things I was going to say is like Jon Snow, for those that watch the Game of Thrones, you can't avoid it. Winter is coming, we know it is. And I've practiced long enough, having gone through 3 or 4 recessions, both in private practice and in-house, to understand some of the dynamics that you as in-house lawyers will be confronting. Now, Michelle and I are not here to talk about inverted yield curves or leading economic indicators or CPI, but as Bob Dylan once sang, you don't have to be a weatherman to know which way the wind's blowing. And we just look around to ourselves and you see probably the most talked about recession that's been coming for a while now. And the headlines we see every day in the paper or on CNBC. And then you look around and you hear announcements of Microsoft and Amazon, all different sorts of companies. If since the time I made this slide, if you looked at the number of layoffs per day since the beginning of the year, it's been averaging about 2,500. Now, as I said, we're not economists, and I'm not sure if this is a sector-specific recession. It's going to be a rolling recession, but other companies and retailers have announced layoffs, so it's not just solely related to tech. But because you always want to be thinking ahead as an in-house lawyer, we know some things are going to be changing in the future, particularly as we go into the year 2023. So with that, we have to ask ourselves, Michelle, what is one to do?
Well, we believe one difference maker is preparation. So Mike and I's goal of this webinar today is to help you start to prepare or continue your preparation, your contingency plans, so that you will react more quickly if you need to. Mike and I survived the Great Recession as general counsels, and we're happy to share some suggestions on what you could consider doing to help prepare as an individual lawyer, and some suggestions for what law departments can do to help prepare. So I recently read in the Harvard Business Review, recessions are a high-pressure exercise in change management. And to navigate one successfully, a company needs to be flexible and ready to adjust. I think the same thing applies to people. Flexibility and ability to adapt and adjust is really important. Research shows that 50% of organizational change initiatives fail. So in order to succeed, I think that embracing the notion of change and change management, if you're a leader, is really important. And three things I suggest focusing on are vision, communication, and engagement. So in other words, thinking about what you want the future to look like and what your gaps are between where you are today and where you want to be, and then communicating that vision to recruiters, to companies, to your boss, to your reports. And I think it's really important in these uncertain economic times to have a lot of communication using a lot of different vehicles and really talking about change, why change is hard, how to move through change. I think it's important to let people air their concerns, let people ask their questions. And I think open and honest communication is extremely important in these uncertain times. And I also think it's important to think about the positives of change. Could you learn something new for someone who takes a leave or gets laid off? Change can be hard, but leading change is harder. And if you're an individual contributor or if you're a leader in your company, I think preparation and embracing of change are both super important.
And when you ask yourself, as you're preparing yourself for change, okay, one thing I've always reminded myself, even I was the general counsel or I was in an outside lawyer dealing with downturn in the economy, you have to ask yourself, and be brutally honest, folks, you know, am I at risk? That's the first sort of self-realization. Am I at risk? Am I a valuable asset to the company? And for those that are on the webinar, you may have attended the one where I talked about how to make yourself a valuable asset or valuable to the company. Are you doing those types of tasks and jobs that are valuable to the company? So you put yourself in the context of everything. You know, we've been practicing long enough. I started practicing law shortly after the earth cooled, and I've seen all sorts of different rifts and layoffs. But one of the important things is that you should know and understand the RIF criteria. Are they going to be talking about heads, dollars, or both? Is it going to be, do you make selections in job? Is it going to be based upon seniority, job performance ratings, a combination? One thing that's often overlooked, and think about it for yourself or your company, is as they prepare to do layoffs, is it going to comply with federal, state, or local laws? And I'm not just talking about the Warren Act or something like that, or collective bargaining agreements, but I know in one case, there was a consent decree with the FTC that predated the arrival of the GC. No one knew that the company had obligated itself to maintain a position. So by consent decree, that position could not be riffed, or if you did it, you better have a good explanation. And then also make sure you understand the financial implications of a layoff or a riff, not only for the department, the company, but also for yourself. Many people don't understand, if you have a deferred comp plan, that starts paying out where you may not want the money, but you have to deal with that. So there are things that you should be thinking about to prepare yourself for change, but not only just internally, but also externally, which lead back to Michelle.
I have two suggestions. One, focus on building your brand, and two, focus on building your network. And I think it's important to do those things, building your brand, which is essentially building your reputation, and building your network, which is essentially building your relationships, hopefully before you need them. And so some of the things I would suggest thinking about are taking a professional headshot, creating a professional bio, upgrading your LinkedIn profile, and perhaps most importantly, practicing talking about yourself, which not everybody is comfortable with and not everybody has done recently. So I think practicing talking about yourself and getting comfortable explaining who you are and what you do is very helpful. On relationships, connect with lots of different people internally in your organization and externally outside your organization. Think about reconnecting with alums from your alma maters, leaning into bar associations and other groups you might belong to, asking somebody new to mentor you, keeping in mind a lot of people want to help other people, especially now in the economic downturn and with the layoffs. People are really trying to help each other. So don't be fearful, be bold, ask somebody exciting to mentor you. You can reach out to people who might be potential references for you and just reactivate those relationships. And I really encourage people not to think of networking as something that you have to do in person. There's a lot of networking that you can do online.
Right. In terms of those mitigation measures, Michelle, what other ones can you think of? Like you said, an elevator speech, perhaps?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what's your elevator speech? It's basically just your pitch for yourself, but I think it's really good to get comfortable practicing it and trying it out on people, seeing what you're comfortable saying, seeing what people react to positively, being able to quickly tell someone what you do. So for me, I'm a former general counsel who's now an executive coach for General Counsel, and I enjoy helping people achieve their leadership goals. You just want a sentence or two or three about yourself that you feel comfortable saying. I looked at the 2023 Association of Corporate Counsel Chief Legal Officer survey, and they had a lot of interesting questions. And one of them was, what will CLOs be looking to hire this year? And 4 things were mentioned: M&A, cybersecurity, data privacy, and legal operations. So those are things to think about. And if you have those experiences, it's good to highlight them. Also, in the non-legal space, what are CLOs interested in on their teams? Communication, listening, executive presence, financial acumen. So not surprises, but good to just remind ourselves what kind of experiences, again, that we want to highlight. I think it's really important to connect with your manager and your business clients regularly, and to be willing to connect with people on lots of different levels using lots of different communication channels. And be your own best advocate. Keep track of your contributions and make sure that your manager can make the case for you. We can always be doing more, any of us, to enhance our reputations and our relationships. And one way, Mike's going to talk about doing that.
Okay. What I was going to say is that when you think about the future, right, as Michelle was talking about, what skills should I acquire or improve? So you don't have to be assigned cybersecurity to start learning about it, or learning about what software programs are out there to improve the efficiency of contract management or department operations. And there are many programs that are available online that you could be signing up for to learn it. Because again, going back to my statement earlier, you know, you want to be a valuable asset to the company. All right. You don't want to, companies don't get rid of valuable assets. So they try to maintain them and hold on to them. So think about what skills should I acquire or improve. Another area is the alternative legal service provider. You know, when a company's faced with cutting back in the legal department, maybe it's something where you could think and say, you know what, I'm very good at executive comp and regulatory and the, you know, SEC filing requirements, but maybe it doesn't need to be a full-time job for the company, and I could become part-time or hourly or whatever. And that's something that may interest you because it allows you to the freedom to do some other pursuits. But before going up and volunteering or talking about it, just make sure that the severance requirements of the company that you're working for will not prohibit you being retained as an alternative legal service provider. I know at one company I worked, if the person received severance, they could not, by contract, they agreed not to reapply for any job with the company for at least 1 year. So that was just something that you'd be, just talk to your boss if you think of that. Another one is your resume up to date. And you'd be surprised how many people I talk to when I ask them, how's your resume? It was, well, it was 6 years ago that I did it when I took this job. All right. So, and a lot has happened in those 6 years, along with the formatting of resumes and the like. You know, another question, are you in our database? Does Barker Gilmore have your latest and greatest resume and what you've been doing? And then a practical matter, so you're not having the stress, save enough money for a rainy day. All right. Those are just practical things you should think about. But one of the important things that Michelle's going to talk about, and I think sometimes often overlooked, and that is LinkedIn.
LinkedIn is the online branding, networking, job hunting platform. It's also the most trusted social media platform. There's over 800 million people on LinkedIn, and most companies and search firms today leverage it for recruiting. Using LinkedIn can really help you improve your professional reputation and build your network of relationships. It's one of the first places recruiters do when they're searching for candidates for open positions. And frankly, when people meet you or are considering you for a position, they'll look you up on LinkedIn. I think one of the most important things to do is to optimize your LinkedIn profile. A lot of people who haven't been in the job market recently use LinkedIn pretty minimally, and they don't really put much time into it. It's always amazing to me how much time lawyers invest perfecting their resumes, but they don't necessarily reflect that resume in their LinkedIn profile. And I really think that you should. You don't have to put every single thing from your resume into your LinkedIn profile, but most of it should be there, and it should tell a pretty good story about who you are and what you do and what your skills are and what your experiences are. So LinkedIn has a thing called an all-star profile. And I think if you are in the market for a new position, or if you're open to new positions, you should think about trying to optimize your profile and get to all-star status, which means you've filled out most of the sections. And there's a lot of education tools on LinkedIn to help you as well. Free tools to help you improve how you show up on LinkedIn. But I really enjoy the tool. I'm not looking for a job, but I enjoy connecting with people on LinkedIn, engaging with people through commenting and posting on LinkedIn. I think that lawyers can be hesitant in this area, but it really is a great way to build relationships.
And for those people just dialing in, this is not an infomercial for LinkedIn or paid sponsorship, but it is a tool, as Michelle says, that you should think about. But we've been talking about yourself and preparing yourself for maybe a reduction in workforce or the recession. But now we're going to talk operationally as you're thinking about as a general counsel, how do I prepare my department? Or if you're a deputy GC or part of a unit, how about preparing that group? And I always start out with the admonition that forewarned is forearmed. And you have to remember the mindset of management. Usually a recession or recession planning, reduction in workforce, it's going to start in the financial sector where that's the impetus. We've got to cut costs, we've got to cut the SG&A, and someone's going to be tasked with those dollars in heads. And then they'll bring in the subject matter experts like HR, they'll probably consult with legal in terms of employment law and the like. But you've got to remember the mindset of management, okay? And I remember one executive telling me clearly, he says, Mike, you know, there are only two jobs at this company, sales and those that support sales. So I knew right away I was supporting sales. I'm not a salesman. So you have that institutional bias against staff positions, sometimes you're overhead, okay? You're not the center of the universe at our company. But even though we may be starting at institutional disadvantage, you've got Michelle and I who've lived through these things to help you plan. So first things first, what do we do, Michelle?
Well, one thing is try to get a seat at the recession planning table, because our fear for you is if you're not at the table, you could end up on the menu. So, you know, sometimes CFOs, COOs, others who might be leading a company's contingency planning project may be resistant from the general counsel or from legal in general being involved. But I think you want to prepare to make the business case for why legal should be involved, and, you know, sell yourself as being there to mitigate risks and to add value, and sort of tailor that to what's important at your company. Is it sales, like Mike said, or is it something else? I think communicating the importance of legal's role in the context of the company's business goals and making a strong business case for why legal should be involved up front is important. And we all know that CFOs speak numbers, and, you know, that's their language. So I would encourage you to start thinking about putting your business case together and getting your numbers gathered so that hopefully you get a seat at the table.
Right. And thinking about those seats, what's one piece of advice you'd want to give the folks on the webinar here?
I think it's to plan, but don't jump the gun. In other words, if you start cutting costs, cutting jobs before you have all the information you need or before the rest of the company, that could work, but it also could mean that you cut deeper than you needed to, or that you have to do it again. So what we're trying to focus on today is some things you might consider doing to prepare yourself or to prepare your department. But one of our messages would be not to panic. Create some delay between, you know, putting your ideas together and actually taking action, so that you have some space to think about and to get advice from advisors, from colleagues, sort of vetting what you're thinking about doing, but not acting too quickly. So one thing I like to say is, you know, I would approach the current economic slowdown by preparing for the worst, but still hoping for the best and trying to maintain some optimism and flexibility. I think that people really prefer working with people that are, you know, glass half full and bring some positivity to the project.
Right. And to add to what Michelle was saying about getting a seat at the table, sometimes legal person will bring a perspective because, for example, the National Retail Federation was indicated what percentage of sales, goods sold over the holiday season would be returned, all right? And the number was astounding as a percentage of sales. And I was just thinking to myself, if the company could consider altering its return policy to save money, right? Just by 1 point, it would probably save, you know, like 2 legal departments worth. And it's one of those things that sometimes never overlooked because it's a sacred cow. But I remember years ago, LL Bean had a policy, anything you bought, you could return, no questions asked, even if it was a 10-year-old pair of khaki pants. That was their thing. And then they changed it and people were worried, oh, I was going to lose customers. They did not lose customers. They were stronger than ever, but they put some guardrails around their returns policy. So it's something as a lawyer you may want to think about. Just don't sit there thinking, okay, how do I save money for my department, or how do I preserve jobs? But look at other operations as the whole for the company. Because remember, although we have a job of giving legal advice and guidance, our purpose is to build a sustainable business for the future. And when you transmit, or you invoke or project that purpose to your fellow business people, then they understand you're not just merely a lawyer, but someone with the purpose of the business behind it. Which leads to something that I learned was with the business people, as Michelle said, they like numbers. Data wins arguments. It's not going to be emotion. It's not because I like this person or I like that person, I'm going to save their job. Data wins argument. And some of the data points that you should know as a lawyer in-house, I would always ask, what's your legal spend, external and internal, as a percentage of the company's revenue, right? And compare it to your industry, to your peers, to your competitors. If you're a publicly filed company, publicly traded, I should say, you're going to have in the executive comp section a list of all the peer companies you're comparing your CEO's salary to. Look at their spend if you can find that data and see how you compare to that. There are industry benchmarks, but business people might say, oh, look, Mike, you've got too many lawyers, you're inefficient. Like, well, wait a second. I had 1.1 lawyer for every $1 billion of revenue. The industry average was 1.3. So I'm beating the fleet average here. So I don't think I'm being inefficient. So you should know the numbers of revenue per lawyer ratio. What's the revenue per legal department headcount? What's your lawyer to contract specialist or paralegal ratio? Your contract completion rate per lawyer. You know, what's your company ad marketing spend versus the lawyers that are supporting that? All these different data points give you an idea if you're better than the fleet average, or there's some inefficiencies present that you need to address as you go ahead and start planning what the organization looks like in the future. And another one I have here is VPN usage. Just an aside is that we use VPN when we're working remotely, as probably many of you do. But it's one thing to say, oh, people are working remotely, are they really working? Well, if they're logging on and going through the pipeline to the servers and working the job, then you can say, hey, look, I have 40 people in my law department, 39 are logging on after 5 o'clock till at least 7 or 8, all right? They are doing work, so we are working hard. But assess your department spending in relation to your industry and sector peers, because again, you're trying to argue or show you are efficient. Now, thinking about efficiency, you do need to be prepared to rationalize your department's workload. And the slide I have up here is, ask yourself this: are you using thoroughbreds to plow a field? It's that simple. What level of materiality warrants legal review? Have you recently reviewed your delegation of authorities in terms of contract review compared to workload? I remember one time I came across one of my lawyers at the director level was reviewing a $5,000 flooring contract for a sales office in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm thinking, like, really? $5,000 flooring contract? How bad can it be? Remember, you have to think of it in terms of, if I'm a $23 billion a year company, if something goes south on a $500,000 contract for end caps, it's not the end of the world, right? So now and then I have to remind the business people, you know, we have to be accepting risks, and you don't have to go to law school to know how to read English. Just because the word says contract doesn't mean a lawyer has to look at it, okay? And Michelle knows what I'm talking about. Here we go. What else, Michelle, can we do?
Well, one thing I think is, think about our profession is all about people and their talents. So as Mike started to talk about, who's on your team? Do you have the right team in terms of how you're staffed? And have you optimized that team based on their skills and experiences? Everybody's been talking about layoffs and rifts, but at smaller companies, you might consider if you could bring more work in-house to achieve cost savings. And if there's a unique opportunity for growth in this recessionary or pre-recessionary environment. At larger companies, there's going to be more pressure, and there's probably going to be conversations about how many layers you have in your legal and compliance team. And is your org structure optimized? And you'll probably be compared to other functions like HR, finance, and others. And you may have to defend yourself. So you may want to gather some best practice measures. So I think that, there are opportunities for growth, but there are also going to be reviews that you're going to need to start building your business case for. But I just wanted to say, because there's so much media attention around layoffs right now, that not all companies have to have headcount reductions in a recession. And so it's a consideration, and we should all be thinking about, do we have the right resources, and are we using the resources in the best possible way? But I don't think it's a given that every company is going to be laying off. In fact, there's some evidence of hiring, and recruiters are still busy.
Yeah, exactly. Just to add to Michelle's point, I would say is that I know a long time it was very fashionable to have flatten the organization, was the mantra of the day. But at some point, the efficiency of how many people can actually you supervise as a lawyer, as a general counsel, has to come into play. But that leads probably to Michelle, how do you optimize the department's performance?
I think the first thing is planning ahead. I recommend thinking about contingency planning in terms of, you have a plan A, but it's a good idea to have an alternative plan B. But it's also important to be adaptable. So if something doesn't work out even in your plan B, can you be calmly ready to make a new plan C perhaps? So I think that you need to be thinking about, what are the types of things you might consider changing, but be flexible about that change. And then there's some obvious things that we should all be looking at, have we streamlined our processes? Have we automated as much as we can? Have we been open-minded about things like artificial intelligence? Have we been open-minded about things that you talked about, Mike, in terms of alternative legal service providers and different methods of contracting or flexible help? Have we been engaged with training the business or offering self-help tools to those folks that might have to start using English, as you said, Mike, and reading their own contracts? And have you created a high-performing legal operations team that's well-functioning and is considering how to optimize your department, streamline your processes, upgrade your systems, use the data to help you build the business case? So I think that it's interesting to me. I mentioned the ACC Chief Legal Officer Survey this year. The number one strategic initiative mentioned in that survey result was 70% of chief legal officers expect to focus on their legal operations function.
Yep, definitely, for sure. And like you mentioned, artificial intelligence, that will come up in the conversation because it's in the press today. Business people will talk about it. But just be aware, artificial intelligence, while it's not foolproof, increases the risk. So if you're a retailer and you're going to rely on AI to review leases for renewal options or whatever, and the AI misses it because it wasn't done by a human being, that may cost the company, which you had a below market lease, and now you're paying at market rates. And it's a risk the company's willing to take because they want to eliminate a $80,000 a year job, so be it. But that's a discussion that you need to have with your business people as they talk about these different systems. But that's why when you think about my employer here, optimizing the performance, you've done everything that Michelle and I have talked to you. You planned ahead, you did this, but the CEO, the CLO, or excuse me, the CFO, they're going to do what everyone always does when they're looking to reorg, and that is they hire an outside consultant. And these people are White Walkers, okay? For those Game of Thrones fans, you know the White Walkers, you can't kill them. They're coming, all right? And I don't think anyone in this phone call has Valerian steel that can kill them. So what are you going to do, okay? The White Walkers are like BCG, McKinsey, Bain and Company. There are a whole variety of them, focused mostly on business operations. They'll look at supply chain, the sales force, optimization of real estate assets or whatever. But rarely in the time that I've gone through and dealt with White Walkers, have they had anybody that knows about legal departments. They will look at us and say, you know, the company's going to use Hertz Rent-A-Car for all rentals across the country. Why can't you use one law firm for everything across the country? I'm thinking to myself, yeah, that's right. I'm going to use Cravath, Swaine and Moore to do a commercial landlord-tenant case in LA Superior Court. No, I don't think so, right? But that's their mindset, all right? But don't worry, because Michelle and I are here, okay? We know how to deal with the White Walkers. And the first thing you have to do is you need to start thinking to stay ahead of the curve. And what do I mean by that? Well, what we mean is planning ahead, but not jumping the gun, right? You hire your own legal consultants to preempt the White Walker, all right? So hire someone that, like, you know, we have people at Barker Gilmore that can actually look at the organization, the operations that you have, and for less, a heck of a lot less than what the White Walkers charge, you could look at and see the operations of where there may be needs for improvement. But it's between you and your outside legal consultant. You also, of course, always want to look, can I take a fixed cost and make it a variable, right? An example I took, we had a full-time job for EEOC matters. And what I did was just basically went to one of my outside firms. I said, will you do it on a per claim basis? And so it's variable costs now. You get an EEOC claim, $3,000, it's taken care of. Boom, bang, we're done. If we have 10 claims, we're spending $30,000. If we have 20 claims, we have to spend more money. But that was very simple. Lean on all your vendors, not only your outside counsel, but anybody that's a vendor to you in terms of looking for discounts, volume discounts, consolidating the outside legal spend. Consolidation can work, but only in those instances where it makes sense for your company and the legal risks that you confront. For myself, when I was in the retail area, I could rely upon one firm that pretty much had a national coverage for labor employment issues. So I could get volume discounts in terms of that work. Other types of legal issues would be more sector specific. So you have to think about consolidation. Do your outside counsel guidelines reflect the economic realities of today? You know, and take a look at those where you can trim some money there. And then finally, you're probably going to be given targets by the CFO in terms of the number of heads, what the organization should look like, the number of dollars to be taken out. And again, don't just accept it as holy writ that, oh, I've got to eliminate 5 jobs and $1 million at outside or inside spend. Look at it in terms of, can I live with this? Can the company live with this? Because at the end of the day, it's a business decision that has to be balanced against the legal risk that you're trying to mitigate against and to manage. So again, you should socialize the impact of these changes. Again, you've had your consultant, you've worked with them, you know what's going to come down the line. So then you look and you work with the business people. And when I worked for Sony, it was called nemawashi, and that's a Japanese term, which actually is a gardening term. It's where you slowly cut around the roots of a tree and uncovering the roots slowly, so that when you finally do move the tree, it doesn't suffer shock. It can handle the transplant. So in the corporate context, nemawashi is basically quietly laying the foundation for some of your proposed changes. Because again, if you're going to reduce the number of legal reviews, you may have to talk to the head of retail and say, look at, or the head of the merchant organization and say, look at, we're not going to be reviewing contracts that are $1 million or less. It's just not, we don't have the horsepower to do it anymore under the new regimen. Now that business person may not want that. Well, that's a different discussion to have. But again, as you go around company and perform this laying the groundwork on Nemawashi, one thing I always have to remind the business people, legal work is not linear to sales or production. And here's an example. Sales and marketing runs 10 campaigns, that require a legal review, all right? And let's say it generates 20 billion in sales for the year. Now, sales and marketing are projecting that in the future, 2023, 2024, we're going to lose about 2 billion. The sales are going to go down 10%. Now, does that mean sales and marketing are going to decrease the number of campaigns from 10 to 8? I don't think so. If anything, my experience has been they've increased it from 10 to 12. So we have to do more work for less sales. So again, sales may go down, but the legal work actually may increase. Service levels will change. We used to have the luxury of having a lawyer sit in a circular review, circular review. Maybe during the whole 4-hour process, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe worth of legal stuff about how to say buy one, get one free, 2 for 1, whatever. But you can't afford that luxury anymore. So again, the marketing people, the merchants will come up with a circular, then send it over to legal. Then we'll give comments back and forth, back and forth. It may be inefficient because you didn't have a lawyer there for 4 hours, but you couldn't afford the 4 hours. So as long as they understand it, that the service level may change. And then finally, one thing I always remind, you have to be willing to accept greater risks, okay? If you eliminate a lawyer job, one of 3 things are going to happen, all right? 1, the legal work's not going to get done. 2, the legal work will be done, but it's going to be delayed. Or 3, the legal work's going to be done by outside counsel, which is typically more expensive and overly conservative on the advice. They really don't understand the business. So you're going to be careful what you wish for. You really may not be saving that much money at the end of the day. So that's what I'd say in terms of all those things. And again, like Newton's law of physics, Newton's law of legal reorganization. For every reduction in legal spend, there'll be an equal and opposite reduction in legal review. Okay, so with all those good, helpful hints, I'm going to let Michelle take us home.
Well, best-in-class law departments are going to continue to invest in the future, and talent retention is something really important to invest in. There's so much press about layoffs and reductions in force. I want to make sure that we give advice that there's the other side to it. The talent that you have, the talent that you're keeping, you want to make sure you keep those folks engaged. I saw a great quote on LinkedIn. Go for 5-star content, impact, and interaction in a 3-star setting. So, people don't quit jobs because it's difficult times or the work is difficult. The research all shows that people typically quit leaders. So even though there may be a downturn in the economy, even though there may be cost-cutting pressure, even though there may be some layoffs, the folks that are on your team need to be engaged, and you need to stay connected to them, even if you need to do it in lower cost ways. And it's really important to focus on your strongest performers, because those are some of the folks who hopefully will help you get through the change and will be agile and adaptable and flexible. And if you're somebody who wants to make sure you stay and that you show your value to the company, I think it's important, like I mentioned before, to be a bit of a self-promoter during this time. And as Mike mentioned, also get good at budgeting if you can. Finally, I really want to say that very good people do lose their jobs in economic downturns. You're not a bad person if you lose your job. Very successful lawyers, very talented lawyers have been laid off. In one situation, somebody that I worked with and highly valued was laid off after I left my GC role. And that was difficult, but that person is today the chief legal officer at another major retailer. So my message is, if it happens to you, try. It's very hard, but try not to take it too personal.
Yeah, I can say that again, Michelle, it's easier for us to say don't take it personal, but again, the companies are eliminating jobs, they're not eliminating people. Okay, and it's just a fact of life that we have to deal with. So with that being said, I'll ask Bob if he wants to control the slides back again.
Thanks so much, Mike and Michelle. And so we have a couple of questions here. The first one is on the comp comparison point. Can you advise on what you found most helpful in terms of benchmarking on spend comparison by department? Does ABA, ACC, or other group conduct that type of summary?
Well, I'm trying to think now, I used two sources back in the day for legal department spend. I also went to ACC for data, and then I also went to my HR department for data because they'll have the compensation ranges for legal departments in the retail, this was the time in retail sector, of what the fleet average was for how much you're spending for a director with so many years. So let's say, for example, the average price or cost of a director fully loaded was $250,000, and I could demonstrate that my fully loaded cost was $230,000, then I'm better than the fleet average. So you can do it by compensation in terms of the not individual, but the grades or titles of your department. You can also do it in terms of the overall revenue. Sometimes the data is hard to get from specific companies, although your trade association may have it, particularly in your particular industry, as to how many people there are. Usually they don't break out in terms of the legal department budget in public company filings, at least we didn't. So I have to use third-party sources. And that's, I know, Michelle, if you had any other sources that you've used.
Similarly, I relied heavily on our trade association as well as ACC. And then finally, Barker Gilmore puts out a number of survey reports. Right. So those are things that I can think of.
Yep, absolutely.
The next question is, what is the legal consultant review that you mentioned? And can you give me an example?
Yes, that would be where, let's say you're thinking of, like, say, I want to know how good is my department. Well, I want an assessment, let's say, of are we operating efficiently? Are we organized efficiently? So you call Bob Barker and say, Bob, can you put together a proposal to look at my operation? So we go first by industry sector, looking at, we have, so many senior advisors from so many different industries with over 330 years of experience under their belt. And then you look at, are you more interested in the operations, people organization, processes, or whatever, and put together a proposal saying, okay, for this, we can come in and do this review and tell you where you are strengths, where there are opportunities for improvement. Is one. I mean, there are other companies out there, but I don't work for them, so I'm really not going to talk about them.
Great. And then there was just a comment by someone. The GC of a Fortune 50 company once told me he aimed to have 4 attorneys on his staff for every $1 billion in revenue. And it's obviously dependent on many factors, what industry and what have you the company operates. Do either of you have kind of a rules of thumb on a number of attorneys per billion or what have you?
Michelle, you want
No, because I think it's really important to focus on industries. So for example, I have worked in 3 different industries myself, and I've now coached people in many, many more industries than that. And the industries operate very differently. So I don't think that you can say 4 lawyers per billion or 10 lawyers per billion generally. I think what matters is, are you in tech? Are you in retail? Are you in manufacturing? and what are the standards and what are your peers doing? What are your competitors doing? That's definitely the way the outside consultants and probably your HR and finance functions are going to look at it. So I think it's helpful if you look at it that way. So I think it's hard to generalize across geographies and across industries. I think it's helpful if you look at it from the lens of your industry, if you can, if the information's available.
I would echo Michelle's comments because of I can think of several industries and several companies I know and worked with where heavily regulated or a lot of IP involved where, you can have a lot of IP lawyers prosecuting patents or, supervising outside counsel or others in dealing with privacy related issues, where other things, it's, if it's a low tech industry and you're just buying stuff, turning around and selling it, then your ratio should be different, but it should be industry specific. And the data is out there breaking it down by industry for sure.
Great. Well, Mike, it looks like there is one other point here. Even in tech, there are so many I think it's just more of a comment of what you're saying is even within technology, there's many different, subsets of industries that can make a huge difference. So.
Right, exactly. And the other thing I'd say in terms of it with the headcounts is, again, looking at the technology solution, and whatever you look at, just make sure that you are taking the time to look at it in the term of the risk and managing risk. So you may save dollars, but never be penny wise and pound foolish. That's the worst thing a GC could do, Yeah.
One other question that just came in, as far as your thoughts on being in office. There's a lot of CEOs who are preferring that their employees work in their office 3 to 4 days a week rather than just remotely. And just a thought, but it may be helpful for GCs to encourage employees to be present in the office more regularly. Any other thoughts on that in today's environment?
I think Michelle touched on it in terms of when she's talking about advocating for yourself and being visible, and it's really going to be an individual and the company specific, but perception's reality. And it's going to be, I know some executives that I've worked with in the past, they were, I'll use it, old school. And their idea was, if you were in the office, that means you were working. If you weren't in the office during a snow day, that means you were at home goofing off. That's not the mentality necessarily. And that's why at one time, knowing I would be confronted with this argument, I obtained the VPN usage to demonstrate empirically that my lawyers, although they weren't in the office that snow day, were actually at home logging in, doing work. Okay. So being out of sight wasn't out of mind. But again, that's going to be more cultural with the company. And personally, if a CEO said, I like to see people 4 days a week in the office, I think that's a strong signal,
Right. Well, Mike and Michelle, thanks so much for sharing your insights and best practices.
There's one other question, Bob. Did you see?
Oh, was there? Just let me see.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any suggestions of a low-cost way to track and quantify all the work your department performs and value added to business for leadership? So starting from zero.
Michelle, do you want to start with that one?
Well, that's what legal ops departments do. So if you don't have one, you might want to get one, or just a person. Nowadays, some of the legal ops teams are huge, but they usually start out with just a person who's good at metrics and can help you build your business case. So that's not really my area of specialty. I'm a leadership coach. So I don't know that I want to say too much about that other than, there are industry groups focused around legal operations. There's a lot of literature and trainings around legal operations. And as Mike mentioned, we have some operations experts within our firm as well. I just am not personally one, so I don't want to say too much because I might say the wrong thing.
Right. I did implement a contract management system while I was at Staples, very rudimentary, basic one. And then I started tracking the number of contracts that were opened, pending, and closed every month. And I generated a report. All right. So I could tell the CFO and the CEO last month, you know, I said, we opened 823 contracts. We still have 635 pending, and we closed 458. And it was like, oh, wow. And it was like, because Michelle said earlier, the business people think in terms of Excel. Okay. Lawyers think in terms of Word. So where we meet in the middle is PowerPoint. So you have to be demonstrative in terms of, wow, you guys opened that many contracts now. Who knows what kind of contracts they were, but at least you're trying to start the quantification discussion. Mm-hmm. It's like, you know, these people are not just sitting in their office, you know, drinking lattes and kicking back and talking about the, you know, the Super Bowl ads. So that's my advice.
Wow. Again, so just for all the attendees today, we want to make these programs as valuable as possible. So we do ask to provide some feedback. We just have a 1-minute survey that we send out. So please provide your feedback there. And all the attendees, thank you for joining. Michelle and Mike, again, thanks for all your insights. And obviously, if there's opportunities where we could be of assistance, whether it's recruiting, coaching, advising, please reach out to us. Otherwise, we look forward to having you join us on a future GC Advantage webinar.
Thanks
again, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.